Hey everyone, this is TJ. I am super excited to be back with episode 210. I'm so sorry, first off, about the last episode. Episode 209 was very heavily delayed. And honestly, I just think that the cosmos was against Richard and I on that one. I touched on it a little bit in the intro to that episode, but honestly, things got worse since I recorded that intro, which led to it ultimately being delayed to I think it was a Monday that I ended up putting it out. I don't even remember because I honestly just want to put it behind me. Um, but I'm super excited to be back with this new episode and barring anything unforeseen, this will be out on a scheduled Thursday per usual. I, of course, am joined by the audio producer of the show, Richard. So, Richard, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm just been hanging out this weekend. Let's see. Yesterday I decided to pick up Sonic Origins despite hearing a lot of really, really bad press about the game cuz I consider myself a Sonic fan. Classic Sonic's good. And so I was like, you know what? Yeah, I'll go ahead and get this. And essentially, it's a waste of $40 because what ends up happening is they've taken the mobile ports for Sonic 1 and 2, put them on a console, and then they tried to give Sonic 3 and Knuckles the same treatment, but it just th- there's several things wrong here. So just to kind of start from the top and give a little bit of backstory, there was a guy who went by the username the Taxman on the Sonic Retro forums, and his real name's Christian Whitehead. And he spent a lot of his time as a young boy actually making Sonic fan games. And sometime in 2011, 2012, he put together a concept video of Sonic CD, which was a game that was released for the Sega CD that not a lot of people played. He made a concept video of it running on the iPhone. And it got someone's attention at Sega because before we know it, they're actually talking to him about porting the game to the iPhone and other mobile platforms. Turns out what he did was he created his own engine that he called the Retro Engine, and using it, you could port Sonic games to modern hardware almost perfectly. And so he struck a deal with Sega where he ported Sonic CD, Sonic 1, and Sonic 2 all in the Retro Engine. Sonic CD got some big quality of life improvements, and Sonic 1 and 2 actually had a really cool improvement where the dude resynthesized the music on better hardware. So it was better quality music, you could play as additional characters. They were really good ports. They were really solid ports. They were only like 3 or 4 bucks for your phone. And everyone was like, "Man, that's fantastic, Sega. Do you ever think we could get any of that on the PC?" And Sega just went, "Fuck you," and decided to never give that to anyone until they released Sonic Origins. Kind of the same thing happened when people said, "Man, this is really good treatment with Sonic 1, 2, and Sonic CD. Do you think we could get Sonic 3 and Knuckles?" And they said, "What's Sonic 3 and Knuckles? We don't know what game you're talking about," and just kind of tried to Jedi mind trick the fan base into thinking it didn't exist for however many years. But what ended up happening was over the course of the last year or so, Sega's finally relented and they're like, yeah, let's give Sonic 3 and Knuckles the same treatment that we gave Sonic 1, 2, and Sonic CD. Unfortunately, the quality of the port is severely lacking, and several reasons for that revolve around Sega's refusal to let the developer do anything cool. There was another guy that the taxman worked with named Stealth, who actually is the head of his own game production studio now called Headcanon. And when Sonic Origins was being made, they reached out to Headcanon for some additional help using the Retro Engine. If you look on the credits screen, it shows they're using the Retro Engine on license from Christian Whitehead's new game company, Evening Star, and they also brought in Headcanon for some additional tweaks, like they did with Sonic Mania. So you've got a dream team here of people who could create excellent ports of these games, but for one reason or another, Sega said, hey, you know all that cool shit you want to do? We're going to need you to not do that, and I want you to barely increase the quality of this game. Also, we're going to take all the good music out of it and replace it with some real shitty stock music. And essentially, what ended up happening was they took a great game and they made it slightly worse. And the reason I say that is because all those quality of life improvements we saw in the previous ports are non existent in this port for Sonic 3 and Knuckles. The only thing that's slightly different is some of the animations look a little bit smoother. The two player mode isn't so compacted together. Um, And also, they had to remove a bunch of music from the Sonic 3 part of the game because, spoiler alert, a lot of it was actually made by Michael Jackson. There'd been rumors of this for years, but it's only within the last 2 weeks we've actually officially gotten confirmation from a Sega employee that Michael Jackson indeed did write a few tracks for Sonic 3.
That
But what
is
happened?
crazy.
Yeah, but what happened was his allegations became public, and
Mm,
Sega wanted to distance themselves from him, so they took his name off the project, but they left the music in. If you talk to any hardcore Michael Jackson supporters and people who worked with him, in this case, Brad Buxer, who is also listed in the credits, they tend to say that Jackson didn't want his name on the game because he was not impressed with the sound quality of the Sega Genesis. So there's two theories as to why his name was removed, but the music was not. If you take a Sonic 3 cartridge, pop it in your Genesis, Carnival Night Zone through the end of the game has different music, and that music is legitimately by Michael Jackson. And Ice Cap Zone is actually a song called "Hard Times" from a band called the Jetsons that Brad Buxer was a part of, and he just repurposed it for that. So they've taken all that music out and replaced it with music from the November 1993 prototype, which the prototype music sounded good. But then they told Jun Sanu, who did all the music for Sonic Adventure, they said, hey, take these tunes and fix them up. And unfortunately, what he did was he actually made them slightly worse because he changed the keys on them. He picked FM patches that weren't punchy like the original. So it's just needless changes. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It just
right.
blows me away that they're taking this game and just trying to quote unquote fix these issues when in reality the only thing that's probably stopping them is the Michael Jackson estate. They probably just have to pay them some money and they just don't want to do it. Now, I
Yeah.
mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, it seems like this is a very common theme with companies with like porting their retro games, especially like they just go super lazy with it, and it's just like a very obvious cash grab that they honestly don't care about, and especially the timing of all of this, like they're obviously riding the wave of the Sonic 2 movie and also like all of the hype of just the summer of video
Oh
games
yeah.
right now, and so it's like make it more obvious that you don't really care about this and you just want money because like that's what it is. And I don't blame you for, for buying it because I think as fans of video games and fans of like beloved games such as those that are classics, we want to have them accessible to us. And so especially like the convenience of mobile gaming now, like whether it's on the Switch or on phone or like Steam Deck, things like that, like it's
Hmm.
even more enticing to have a port of a classic game readily available to you on these modern hardware systems. So
Absolutely.
it's just like we're just getting raked over the coals here repeatedly, and it sucks when it's like a company like Sega that we would love to be able to maintain our fond memories of, but instead, unfortunately, it seems like we're leading into a lot of these episodes with us having to shit on these companies repeatedly.
Yeah, first Blizzard, now Sega. Who's next? Nintendo? If Nintendo's next, I might just have to retire from video games forever. But you want to talk about lazy ports? I have not even begun to scratch the surface, my friend, because it's very apparent by these ports that Sonic 1, 2, and Sonic CD that were all handled by Christian Whitehead, you can tell that he was a fan because he put in time and effort into making everything in them
Hmm.
absolutely fantastic. Then Sonic 3 and Knuckles comes along and they're just like, just put it in the fucking box with everything else. We don't give a shit. And that's sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. So they put Sonic 3 and Knuckles in finally after all this time. But then we get this thing called missions where they've decided to basically make some little missions for the rest of the games. And all in all, the main reason you complete the missions is to get these coins. The coins unlock stuff in the museum, so you can look at illustrations and concept art. It took me, all in all, probably about 3 hours to do it all. Now I have 800 coins, a completely full museum, everything unlocked, everything 100%ed. I've collected all the Chaos Emeralds in every single game, And in total, I got about 12 hours out of this for $40 when it just it just feels lazy. It just feels so fucking lazy. And on top of that, I did pay for the DLC for the extreme missions, which were not that hard, and for some additional music. And this is what I was talking about with lazy, because they finally put in some music from a game called Knuckles Chaotix that like 5 people have heard of. It's a good
Mhm.
game. It was just created for a shitty add-on that no one had, so it didn't sell a whole lot. And so as a result, Sega likes to pretend that it basically never happened. But they put the soundtrack of the game in the DLC so you can listen to it. But every single track has the wrong track name. All the track names are
Oh
there, but
my
they got
gosh.
mixed around between all the songs. You can't even quality check the fucking music. It just blows me away because it feels like trolling, honestly. It's like everyone's going, acknowledge that Knuckles Chaotix exists, and Sega finally does, but it's just like a shittily written note that just says Knuckles Chaotix and it's misspelled. It's just like a slap in the face to anyone who actually enjoys that game and maybe wants to play it
Yeah.
someday, but we'll never have the opportunity because the cartridge is $100. The shitty add-on for the Sega Genesis is $100. A Sega Genesis like $50 and got to get all the video cables and shit. It's just it's just stupid. And what kills me even more is like they put up scans of the manual and shit from the game in there. And it's like, okay, you're getting me the soundtrack, you're getting me concept art, you're getting me the high quality scan of the manual. How about the game? Where's the game, Sega? I'd love to play that if you have it laying around somewhere.
They couldn't find a fan to do that for them.
Yeah,
That's the short
obviously.
answer.
They probably had the intern do it, and he's just like, yeah, I found Sonic Spinball. That's like about all I can do for you guys.
Yeah, we can get what's the Eggman Beans game?
Hey, we don't talk shit about Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. That game's a
There we go.
classic. Even if it is just a reskin of Puyo Puyo.
Yeah, I mean that I guess that's what's frustrating. Like there was all this hype around Sonic Mania, and but that's the thing. It's like that's the last Sonic game that was like actually worth anything, and like Sonic Team didn't even make it. It was made by fans,
Yeah, I
and
know. That's what makes this so frustrating.
yeah,
All the best Sonic shit we've gotten in the last 3 years has been fan made. The company
hmm
hasn't even touched it. So, and then they're all surprised when people are skeptical about Sonic Frontiers after that that fucking footage that IGN released that was from an early build of the game but looked like it was made in Roblox.
right. And they actually pulled out the people don't get it excuse. It's like, no, 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 we get it. We just know your track record. Like no one is buying into this. Or like
It's like it just sucks so much. I feel like a foster kid almost. It feels like Sega's my parents and they like drive by the orphanage every day and they're thinking about picking me up, but they're just kind of like, nah, fuck that guy, and they just keep driving. It's like they're holding the gift. It's like they're holding the Christmas sack out the window, and they're like, "Oh, come on, come get your treat. Oh, you're gonna miss it." And then they like pull forward just a little bit, like, "Oh, you got to reach a little bit further," and then they just drive off. That's what being a Sonic fan's like anymore because it just feels like getting repeatedly kicked in the balls and then saying thank you afterwards.
Yeah, it is super frustrating, especially because of I mean, we had our review of Sonic 2 and we talked about how good those movies are. So it's so frustrating that they can't like, capitalize on the fact that, culturally we're ready to accept Sonic. And when I say we, I mean like the general public, not even just like, gamers or Sonic fans specifically, but the general public is ready for Sonic. And unfortunately, they just see that as an excuse to, just do the bare minimum and make a little extra money versus like actually taking the time to capitalize and make something great that can really, carry the momentum forward.
I know, it's like the same way Konami treats Castlevania anymore. Like Castlevania's got an insanely great TV show, but when's the last good Castlevania game that came out? Oh yeah, that was like 1998, 1999 maybe. Been a while.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. It is I think in particular with gamers, I mean, we are so attached to certain IP in a way that I don't think most fandoms really are. I mean, anime is probably the closest, and there's obviously a lot of crossover there. And it's tough because essentially, like, we're being taken advantage of because these companies, unfortunately, know that they can really just kind of roll something out, and they are going to sell if it's something that they know the fan base is excited about, or if we just have a love for a certain series or characters or whatever, like, people are going to buy into it.
Yeah, and another thing that really rubbed me wrong was that whole museum. It's got illustrations, music, and movies. Um, all of the stuff that they included in the museum is available for free on the internet. You can just go find it. Scans of all of that stuff already exists because of hardcore fans that have been curating this shit for decades. So all you're really paying for is just kind of a turd wrapped up in some plastic wrap. That's what it feels like. And not to mention, all those ports that are in Origins, better fan made ports already came out about a year ago. There's a beautiful, beautiful mod called Sonic 3 Angel Island Revisited that basically makes the game completely brand new. It includes all the stuff from the November 1993 prototype. There's options to customize which zones order you play in. You can, because there was some changes that were made during development, and with this mod you can actually reverse those changes and play the game as it was originally intended, because Sonic 3 and Knuckles was originally just going to be Sonic 3. They had to split it between two cartridges because of time constraints. So when you're playing this port, you're actually playing the game as it was intended to be played at one point in time. And it's amazing. And you know what? It's free. It's free on the condition that you own the Sonic 3 and Knuckles ROM for Sega Genesis Classics on Steam. And it's only like $3. But guess what? Now, with Sonic Origins out, they've taken all the ports of those four games in particular, delisted them. So now the
Of course.
only way that you can play them is by buying their fucking stupid shit port.
In summary, this impromptu review of Sonic Origins, it's no good.
Oh, I'm out. Goodbye. I have to leave now.
All right, so Richard's taking a break, and that seems like a good time for us all to take a break. When we get back, we are going to jump into a conversation about not only one of this week's big movie releases, Elvis, but also going to be talking about music biopics in general. So, Richard, I'm going to try and track him down to join me for that conversation. And then afterwards, we'll jump into a kind of state of the union on Star Wars television under the Disney umbrella. So, stay tuned. All right. So, Richard, I saw Elvis this past week. I know you didn't have a chance to see it yet. Fortunately, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to spoil with biopics in general. I mean, I guess technically you can spoil something if someone didn't know about it, but this is someone who actually lived an entire life. So if you cared to research them even casually, you'll probably find out a lot of things. But I wanted to share a little bit about Elvis and just kind of my impressions of the movie. First off, it's super long. Um, it is like 2 hours and 40 minutes or something around that, and I was really surprised by that. But I guess not to be insulting, because obviously someone as interesting as Elvis, like, I mean, you could make hours and hours of a televised product based on his life, and so in a lot of ways, the fact that they were able to condense it to that length is kind of impressive, but it still was long for a movie, if that makes sense. But it also kind of very much takes the approach of focusing on the relationship of Elvis Presley and his very conniving, manipulative business manager, who in this is played by Tom Hanks, who does an excellent job. So no complaints there. I overall, I really did like the movie, and it was just kind of fascinating the way that it told this story about someone I didn't really know too much about. I mean, Richard, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about Elvis in general, and I mean, you knew some of the story details, I guess. Did you know a whole lot about Elvis, or do you know a whole lot about Elvis's background and everything?
So my mom was a huge, like absolutely huge Elvis fan. But despite all of the music I listened to, I didn't know a whole lot about his backstory other than like he kind of came up mostly doing gospel stuff at first, and then he kind of transitioned to doing doing what Elvis does, I guess. That's the best way I could put it.
Yeah.
I do know that like early in his career, basically he used a lot of black music to make his career happen. If anything, he was like the way to basically make black music palatable for a white audience, and that was pretty much his claim to fame, I think.
Yeah, and I haven't done a whole lot of like research before or after the movie, to be honest. So I'll just talk about, what the on-screen portrayal was. And I mean, they didn't shy away from that at all. Like they definitely very heavily showed like the influence of black musicians and black culture in forming essentially, the mystique of this character that is Elvis. And
Mhm.
it's exactly what you said. Like, at that time, and I mean, arguably today, like people were not going to be open to that type of thing unless it was coming from a white person. And even then, they really weren't super accepting of it. I mean, the biggest thing, and again, this is something that was definitely portrayed in the movie, was it was like young women that he was attracting to his music, and with his obviously his notorious dance moves and the jerky leg movements and all of that caused all this mayhem and everything. And so like super interesting story. Like there's a lot to dig into there. And I think they did a really good job of kind of painting. I think the part about his rise to stardom was my favorite part of the movie. And then like the second half, they really kind of shifted gears and focused more on like kind of well, basically it was kind of like the paint by numbers biopic, which is why ultimately I thought we could have a great conversation about biopics in general, music biopics, because they do kind of do the rise and fall type of approach to this movie, which is very common. And the wrinkle with this one is that they focused on him being essentially manipulated and conned by his business manager, who is someone that was with him from the very beginning and always gave him the impression that he truly cared about him and was looking out for his best interest. But the movie, like right off the bat, is, I mean, Tom Hanks's character, I think it's Colonel Tom Parker, which is not the guy's actual name, like it was a made up name that he used. Um,
Right.
he he's the narrator, and he's talking about like how he found him and then like saw, and he openly is talking about like basically conning people like at a carnival, and refers to himself as the snowman, um which I guess is a term to refer to people basically like that are scammers, con artists type of thing. It with I guess it's supposed to be like a little bit more of a nicer way of describing that type of thing. So
Okay.
I mean, I liked it overall. Again, I think the first half is a lot better. I think it's more exciting. You, I thought it was more like, learning more about Elvis as a person and kind of his background and his background in music. I mean, they really talked about how he kind of merged, like, I think they literally said white country with black R&B,
Oh.
and like kind of that was how he created his sound. And
Mhm.
I thought that was super interesting. Obviously, he's known as the king of rock and roll, so like you do kind of see how that sound evolved a little bit and became more of what people would refer to as rock and roll over the years as well.
Mhm.
And then the second half was just kind of depressing more than anything, which is a running theme with these types of movies. But we see his relationship with Priscilla, his wife, kind of deteriorate, and we see his health obviously go downhill, and like obviously he died young. Um, I also think like he's such a Las Vegas icon. Um, in his personality very much fit that, like, his just kind of his character as a whole, just so flashy and everything, like fit
Right.
Vegas. And it was so this was actually one of the most interesting parts of the second half of the movie was, at least this is kind of the claim the movie is making, is that his like entire residency and that association with Vegas was basically because his manager was not a legal US citizen, did not have a passport, and was not able to travel outside of the country. And so he prevented him from going on international tours and locked
Oh,
him into,
wow.
yeah. And he locked him into, and it gets even worse because he locked him into like this deal with a brand new casino that had opened, where this guy had racked up mountains of debt to this casino. And essentially, like, um in Space Jam, there's like the little anecdote about like Michael Jordan being chained up as an amusement park attraction and like having to play against little alien kids and lose every time.
Oh, so Elvis was the one that had to play the alien kids.
Yeah,
Is
basically
that
that,
basically it?
because he was basically a prisoner, and there's a part in the movie where um so the song Suspicious Minds, um I forget the exact lyrics, but it's there's the first lyric is like, I'm caught in a trap. And there's a part, I don't know if this actually happened or not, if this was just dramatized for the movie, but like he's
Yeah.
singing on stage and he says like, I'm caught in a trap, and he's like referring to literally being trapped on that stage performing repeatedly, and then like calls out the manager in front of everyone, and then ultimately like fires him. And then like the guy try like lists out like every penny that he was quote unquote owed, over years of Elvis's career, that amounted to like 8 million plus dollars, which in the 70s was even more so than it is now. um
Right.
and then the big thing was like Elvis lived this big flashy lifestyle, so he spent a lot of money. He was not,
Mhm.
you would think, oh, it's Elvis, he's the biggest star in the world, like that shouldn't be anything. Well, no, because he spent like all of his money. So the fact that that guy had that to hang over his head led to him being trapped even more so. And so just like, if you're interested in this movie, like it is very interesting. It's almost like a pseudo documentary type of thing, more so than it is. Well, I guess it is very heavily dramatized.
Mhm.
And uh Baz Luhrmann, I'm not actually familiar with his work. He's the director, but he very clearly has a lot of uh style, like a lot of flourish in his personal directing style. So there's a lot of really interesting cinematography in this.
Mhm.
One thing that definitely jumped out to me, and I had to like sit there and think to myself for a second, because there's a part early on where Elvis is like walking on the streets of Memphis, and then all of a sudden there's like a hip hop song playing, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, is this coming from the theater next door, or what? And I thought it was actually kind of cool, but I wasn't expecting it. But it was like a modern day hip hop song, but was directly like inspired by Elvis's music. Um, and so I haven't checked out the soundtrack, but I'm sure the soundtrack is very interesting because there is a mix of modern music with classic Elvis songs and like the inspirations for those classic Elvis songs as well.
Mhm.
Um, so I mean, overall, I definitely think it's worth a watch. But it still was very formulaic, and I still had some questions about Elvis as well. And it's not necessarily a feel good story. Is probably where I would leave that at.
Yeah, I was gonna say those of us who do know how Elvis's life ended, yeah, it's not that fun. I do want to ask though, at any point in time in the movie, do they ever talk about the Fool's Gold Loaf sandwich or the Elvis sandwich or anything like that?
No, they don't. I was also very curious because I will say this goes from like basically when he's quote unquote discovered all the way through to his death. And they also did not mention that he died on the toilet. So
Oh, well, that's stupid. No, I was asking that because apparently the Fool's Gold Loaf is something that he would just like hop on his plane and fly to Colorado to get. And I'm looking at it right now. It is a hollowed out loaf of bread that's been warmed up. It's an entire jar of peanut butter, an entire jar of grape jelly, and then a pound of bacon. And the man would just down those like crazy. So that part of the movie where he's like getting big, that's why. Because of
Yeah.
shit like that.
Well, and then it kind of cuts to, I'm pretty sure it ends with like actual archive footage of one of his last, if not his last performance.
Mhm.
And I was just like, wow, like, I mean, the guy he definitely got big. Like you see a little bit of that transition throughout the movie, but then it really just kind of hits you there at the end.
Oh yeah,
But
he gets big.
yeah, they'll do it. That's quote whatever. I guess you can call that a sandwich. It sounds like it would have that effect for sure.
Oh yeah, especially with the pound of bacon. My God, good
Oh
thing
yeah,
he wasn't
absolutely.
Jewish, because that would be not kosher at all.
So Richard, I figured we could just kind of, trade off and kind of bring a different biopic to the table and just kind of talk through it if we have opinions. The ones that you talked about, I don't believe I've actually seen. So I am very curious to hear about those. What do you have for us first?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna kind of piggyback off Elvis's stuff for a second. He was kind of into like gospel soulful stuff, and so was Ray Charles. And I actually have Ray here on my list with Jamie Foxx. Have you ever seen that movie?
I actually haven't. It was
Oh, dude.
Yeah, I think that one came out at a time where I probably wasn't as big into movies. And I mean, I don't think I would have been, even now, I'm still not super knowledgeable about Ray Charles. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, it definitely went under the radar for me.
Yeah, it's a super, super good movie, and honestly, Jamie Foxx really sells it as Ray Charles. He does
I
an
have heard
extremely,
that.
extremely good impersonation. But it's kind of like you said, it follows the traditional stuff of a good rockumentary or biopic where we get introduced to this person, we watch their rise to fame, their fall from glory, and then their eventual battle with their inner demons, as that seems to be the trope. So basically, what this is it starts off with Ray Charles as an adult man, but we kind of see flashbacks of his childhood, which was not a good time. I mean, this dude like accidentally let his brother drown in a wash bucket, and he went blind around the same time, so his mom had to ship him off to a academy for the blind. And that really was not a good time at all. Like both of those things at the same time, no way. But eventually what happens is he is picked up in a club, just playing some music, and a couple people start to help him record and actually make a few songs. But he figures out that the people that are actually helping him out are also taking some money off the top and not telling him everything. And that's one of Ray Charles's big things throughout this entire movie. Is he always says, "I may be blind, but I'm not stupid." And that kind of goes back to when his mom had to send him off to school. She goes, "Now, do you remember, just because you're blind doesn't mean you're stupid. So do not let anyone ever tell you that you're stupid." So the entirety of the movie, he's pretty well up on his rights as a musician and as a content creator in that regard. So he knows what he's doing,
Hmm.
which is which can't really be said for a lot of people that get involved with the music industry. Sometimes people get in there and they get put on what they think is a great deal, but then you end up in a situation like Elvis. So Ray
Yeah.
Charles was always really on top of his stuff, and after a while, he got signed to Atlantic Records. And honestly, this guy here that signed him, Ahmet Ertegun, he was a Turkish American businessman who happened to work there, and he saw Ray and was like, "Yeah, you need to come work with us." And they couldn't they couldn't think of a good song for Ray to record. So Ahmet comes out. He's like, "Ray, I have written this song, but I'm not a singer. I would like you to record it." And Ray Charles says, "Oh well, sure. What is it?" And he's like, "Well, it's called The Mess Around." And that ended up being one of his first really big hits that actually moved a lot of units. So it was very good that those two had that working relationship. And then of course throughout the movie it also shows the stuff where like he gets involved with a lady, and then at one point he also gets involved with heroin, Like, get out of here, Ray. You don't want no part of this shit. That whole thing. Uh, like you're gonna see that in every single one of these movies. Honest
Yep.
to God. But so he continues working with Atlantic, but then obviously the drugs start to wear on him a little bit to the point where Ahmet says, "Yeah, man, you're shaking during recording and all this stuff. We can tell that this is like really affecting you." And he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. I can be clean. I can be clean." Well, spoiler alert, he doesn't get clean till the very end when he finally gets to the top, and then he ends up, I can't remember exactly what it is. I think he gets caught. Yeah, he gets arrested for possession. And after that, he finally has to go, he gets sentenced to rehab. And of course, he has a nightmare about being a kid and going blind. And then his mom shows up and says, "Oh, you're going to be okay, Ray. Don't let this drug cripple you." And then, of course, his baby brother shows up. "I know you didn't mean to let me die, Ray. That's not your fault." And then Ray finally goes, "Oh my God, I finally see it now. It is all clear." And then obviously he quits heroin, does what Ray Charles does, makes some more music, and has a long, successful career, and then died like 2 months before the movie came out.
Yikes.
Yeah,
I did not know that about the timing of his death.
yeah, it was pretty close to the release of this movie.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's weird because you're kind of recapping, and obviously there's already a lot of similarities. One really strange reoccurring trope here is like the loss of a sibling in childhood. Uh, like it's such an odd thing that seemed to be like very commonplace in like a lot of these stories of musicians that kind of overcome all of this and to reach their peaks. Such a strange thing.
Yeah, now that you mention it, that is kind of a weird coincidence. That seems to happen to a lot of musicians, or at least did. Maybe that's how they had to manufacture musicians back in the day. They would find a kid that they wanted to be a star, and they'd be like, "All right, we got to make sure they have at least one more kid," and then they have an accident.
Well, and then so Elvis, I think Elvis had a twin that like died in the womb. I don't think it was at birth. So like his mom had, which he had like a really close relationship with his mom, like as a mama type of thing,
Oh
and
God.
I know I keep doing things in this episode. Anyway, um, but like she used to say, I guess that he had the strength of two men because of that, and that was actually one of the lines or that Colonel Parker used to try and manipulate him like emotionally, like after his mom had passed, like, oh, think of what she would want, like, or I think it was actually to get him to sign with him, like, you're up there on the stage, like you look like you have the strength of two men or something is how they frame that. Uh, yeah, so it's just like a weird trope that ends up, echoing throughout a lot of these.
Yeah, that seems super weird, but I think it's also pretty interesting to see that one of the common tactics used to get popular musicians to do the label's bidding is emotional manipulation. It's
Yep.
funny how that works, and then people are surprised when they turn to drugs because they can't confront their own issues. God, the
Yeah.
music industry is so great.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Um, so another one that I think is I think it's kind of infamous at this point. Very polarizing, I guess, overall is Bohemian Rhapsody. So this is a very recent one. This was in 2018, although
Mhm.
2018 at this point feels like 20 years ago. Um, but this came out in 2018. Starred Rami Malek as Freddie Mercury, and it's very much, while it's kind of framed as the story of Queen, it's Freddie Mercury. Like it's not so much about the band as a whole. You get a little bit of like their interactions, but it's all like through the lens of how they interacted with Freddie. And obviously like Queen, super influential group, and then like had a number of huge hits that people would recognize. But this, I think the interesting thing about this movie is it's almost just like watching a concert. Like they have so many moments that like are highlighting their performances. And I'm pretty sure like they're just lip syncing. They didn't record like new versions or anything. And I mean, it is kind of cool. Like Rami Malek, I'm pretty sure he won an Oscar for his role here, but he basically was just like reenacting these performances by Freddie Mercury, like most notably Live Aid at the very end, where I've seen comparisons where it's just like shot for shot the way he's moving it is just in reenactment of what Freddie Mercury actually did. And so like the main kind of storyline here that they also really dig into is like the way he was kind of bullied for like having large teeth and being kind of a goofier guy like when he was younger, and then obviously his sexuality is a big focus of this movie as well. Like and obviously you don't know necessarily what people's lives were like, but it shows him kind of struggling to accept that he is a gay man. And obviously like the culture at that time was not open to that sort of thing at all.
Oh, hell no. God, no.
Yeah. And so I mean that I think it was very emotional. I remember watching this in the theater, and like that stuff did carry a lot of weight. And like I don't remember if he actually married I forget what her name is, but he had like a female love interest that they either married or they were engaged or something. And like she eventually caught on, obviously, that like he's gay. And like they show him, this I don't think was another controversial thing, but they show him kind of having these, I guess I don't know what the actual word I'm looking for here is, but just like having casual sex with other gay men and like making it look so terrible or like, and I guess like the point.
Oh, you're thinking of an orgy.
Well, I know that they did have like orgies and stuff, and like they show like these raunchy basically sex parties and stuff there too. But I think it's just like the way that they're depicting it, like I think Bryan Singer, who was the director, and I think is a well-known piece of shit. So it was a weird thing trying to watch this movie. And what's also strange about this is obviously like Freddie Mercury like did end up did he end up dying of AIDS? That's correct, right?
Yeah, he died of AIDS.
So like I felt like the movie did take like a really insensitive approach to like the AIDS epidemic among gay men at that time, and just made it look like, oh well, these guys were just having sex all the time, it's no wonder like they all got HIV. Like it was not really a sensitive depiction of it, which I guess I don't know, you're trying to accurately depict what this guy's life actually was, but there's only so much of it is hearsay, I guess, too. Overall, I feel like this movie was very fun. I don't think I have not watched it since I originally saw it in the theater. I had a lot of fun watching it. Like Queen songs, and they literally play the hits. Like it was basically like kind of watching a greatest hits music video with some drama in between. And it very much followed the same kind of pattern that we'd been talking about so far, with the rise and quote unquote fall of like a mega star here. And I think I have here they won 4 Oscars. Let's see. Okay, won 4 Oscars. Rami Malek won for best performance by an actor in leading role, best achievement in film editing, best achievement for sound editing, and best achievement for sound mixing. So yeah, obviously if you're a music fan, there's a lot of really good things that come from the actual sound element and audio element of this movie. And I think Rami Malek does do a really good job in here. I think there was some controversy about whether or not he was actually, the winner of that year. I can't remember who the other nominees were at that time, but hey, Rami Malek was in Until Dawn, which spawned The Quarry, which was my most recent review episode. So if you haven't listened to that, go check that out.
It all comes full circle.
It sure does. Did you have another one for us?
Yeah, so I've got another movie here that's actually about Brian Wilson. This came out in 2014. It's called Love and Mercy. And this one's actually kind of interesting because it has basically two time periods that they're focusing on: Brian Wilson's life in the past, and then Brian Wilson's life like 20 to 30 years later. So he's actually being played by two people. In this case, it's John Cusack as the older version of Brian Wilson, and then our resident favorite Paul Dano as the younger version of
Ooh,
Brian Wilson. And this is honestly an extremely good biopic because a lot of people don't know a whole lot about Brian Wilson, who was an absolutely stellar musician. Everyone knows him from the Beach Boys, but he did so many cool things. Like, he was one of the first people that really tried to quote unquote play the studio and like use the recording studio as an instrument almost, just with different effects and different things that you could get out of it. But at the same time, he also had a struggle with mental illness. Brian Wilson is, I believe it's schizoaffective and some kind of depression disorder as well. Right. So schizoaffective and mild manic depression, which is a hell of a combination. So basically, he hears auditory hallucinations while also experiencing manic depression. So the guy has just had an absolutely terrible time having to deal with that. But what
yeah,
ends up happening in this movie is um, we see a little bit of Brian Wilson as an adult man, then we see a little bit of him as a beach boy, quote unquote. But essentially, chronologically, what happens is uh, him and his brothers are on a tour and he suffers a panic attack. And from there, he kind of decides to step back a little bit and instead focus on composition and more work in the studio. And he can really do his own thing and make these absolutely beautiful songs. But the problem is, his dad is one of the guys who's helping manage the Beach Boys, and his dad in this movie is an absolute piece of crap, essentially making it so that anything that he does literally has to be so the Beach Boys make money so that their dad can make money. Kind of like the relationship between Tom Hanks's character in the Elvis movie and Elvis, like
yeah.
you were describing. And yeah, he gets treated like crap, and it's kind of shitty to watch. But he eventually has his get out of here, Brian, you don't want no part of this shit moment when some of his friends introduce him to LSD. And supposedly after he took LSD, that's when he started having the auditory hallucinations. But
Yeah,
there's
that makes sense.
also some reports that he heard those earlier in his life. But no one really knows. It's easy to chalk it up to LSD though, just because
And
of
it
all the
could have
shit that
easily,
happened.
exaggerated that too, even
Oh
if it
yeah,
was
absolutely.
pre-existing.
Absolutely, yeah. But anyways, he makes Good Vibrations, and Good Vibrations sold a lot of units for the Beach Boys. It's what people would consider to be one of their best songs. And at the
I
around the
loved
same
Marky
time,
Mark on that one.
man, you're not making this easy, are you?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Continue. Continue.
But anyways, after that, they were gonna finish up a new album called Smile, but he never got around to it just because of all the shit that was going on in his personal life. So all of his bandmates, they kind of take what's left or what Brian did, and they just create a album called Smiley Smile, which is just like a shittier version of Smile, I suppose. But at the same time, they also learned that their dad sold all the publishing rights to the Beach Boys songs without any of their consent. So basically, that part of the movie ends with young Paul Dano or young Brian Wilson just kind of apathetic about everything. He's just been through a real shitty spot in his life. And then what we get is a look at Brian Wilson as an older man who suffers very heavily from his mental problems. And essentially, what's going on is there's a therapist, and they call him his legal guardian, Dr. Eugene Landy. And this was something that happened too. This guy, this doctor, basically controlled every aspect of Brian Wilson's life and eventually had it set up so that he was the only heir on his will. so that when Brian Wilson died, this doctor could take literally everything of his.
Mm.
But what happened was he ends up meeting this lady at a Cadillac dealership named Melinda Ledbetter. And they kind of start this relationship where Melinda notices this doctor heavily taking advantage of him. And she calls him out on it. And of course, he kind of dials it back and he's like, "Oh, I can't believe you would accuse me of such chicanery," and just shit like that. But eventually she kind of backs off from the relationship because to her, she thinks that he's not that interested, when in reality she doesn't really know the depth of his mental state. But eventually what happens is she is able to get evidence to the rest of Brian Wilson's family that this guy is just ruining his life. So they were able to get a restraining order on him, and then they get him a new therapist. They get him hooked up with someone a little bit better, and he kind of gets his life back to normal. And then, I guess a few years later, they bumped into each other on an intersection, and that's when they started dating and eventually got married. And then the film ends with Brian Wilson completing Smile as his own solo album. So he did eventually go back and revisit that part of his Beach Boys time. But I really enjoy this movie, particularly because while it does kind of have the same tropes as other biopics, it gives us a much more personal look into the kind of person that Brian Wilson is. Because, I mean, he's still alive. He still struggles with this stuff sometimes. You can see performances of him playing songs like Good Vibrations, and you just look at his face and he's just not there. He's just not
Mhm.
having a good time at all. So I think this was a really good movie in the fact that it did show us that side of Brian Wilson, something that people probably weren't familiar with until they saw it. Because I know I wasn't. I didn't think anything about it. But after watching it, I can definitely see like why it was so good.
Yeah, that sounds like a good one. I actually hadn't even heard of that. So that you definitely put that one on my radar.
Yeah, it's super good. Came out 2014. The Elizabeth Banks plays Melinda. Paul Giamatti is the shitty therapist. So it's got a really solid cast of people. It's a
Paul
pretty good movie.
Giamatti plays a really good shitty guy who takes advantage of you.
Honestly, yeah.
What did he play? I swear he played somebody's manager or something where he played basically that type of role.
Well, he was in Straight Outta Compton as their
Oh, that's what it
manager.
is. Yep. That's
And
what I
of
was thinking.
course,
How did I forget about?
yeah.
I should Straight Out of Compton, another good one, following basically the same kind of storyline. I actually really need to go back and watch that again because man, it was forever ago when I watched that, but I thought I
Yeah.
feel like I really enjoyed it.
I mean, do not forget the absolute cinematic masterpiece that is Big Fat Liar. I think that was his peak.
Big Fat Liar, yes, the Frankie Muniz classic.
That they made a sequel to.
They made a sequel to that.
Yeah, they called it Bigger, Fatter Liar.
All right, so next episode, Bigger, Fatter Liar. You heard it here first. Paul Giamatti. Wow. Um, yeah, no, that sounds like a good one. And I think so. I want to talk about my favorite music biopic that really emphasizes this formula. And that's Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. Richard, I know you are also a fan of this one.
Oh, absolutely. This movie is perfect. And it's perfect in the fact that every trope we've talked about gets exaggerated about 10 times in this
Yes.
movie. Like, and I mean literally every trope we've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, if you're somehow listening to this and you've not seen Walk Hard, like definitely check it out because it is hilarious. And so it's basically it's just a parody of everything we've talked about, where it really does emphasize and make fun of these tropes that appear in all these other movies. Like I think most heavily it's influenced by both Ray and also Walk the Line, which came out a little bit before. Walk Hard came out in 2007. I think Walk the Line came out a couple years before then. So that was probably like the triggering, like, all right, let's do this because this movie hit all of those tropes, and we're gonna absolutely parody it, and it's gonna be great. And I think that was the case. I remember this movie not being super well received when it first came out, but I feel like it's grown, the appreciation has grown for it because of how like lasting all of that stuff has been. Like there's been movies that have come out afterwards, Elvis, for example, that almost feels like it just took the bullet points of Walk Hard and then just applied it to Elvis's life.
Yeah, honestly, it's I think it got so much flack when it came out just because it came out like literally right around the same time as Walk the Line. Like Walk the Line and Walk Hard are basically just about the same movie except one of them is humorous and then the other is about Johnny Cash.
Right, right. Well, because it's the same thing. Like even so he ends up having the one wife, and then like he cheats on her with the other artist that he's like touring with.
Mhm.
And then like that's his new like wife, that's his famous wife, and that's literally ripped from Johnny Cash.
Yeah, honestly. And even the whole the wrong kid died thing, that is too, because Johnny
Yep,
Cash
yep.
had a brother that died, and his dad was forever mad about it.
Yeah. Did you know Dewey Cox cut his brother in half?
Now that you mention it, I heard rumors, but I didn't know that actually happened.
Even like getting the inspiration from like black people in their musical culture, like they have that in this movie as well, that's kind of like his origins. um they literally have Tim Meadows' character, he's one of his band members, say, "Get out of here, Dewey, you don't want none of this."
Oh, I think I do want it actually. All right, but just this once.
And oh man, I wish I had all of those lines in front of me, because it's great, because they just shows like the escalation where it starts off and it's uh like, "It's called marijuana, you don't want none of this, it makes you feel good and it's not addictive at all."
Yeah, just he hypes it up like way more than any other kind of hype man could, but he does it on accident, which makes it even better.
Yes, yeah. So I mean, it's absolutely perfect if you watch a couple of these types of movies and then you watch this. Like I guarantee you'll have such an appreciation for it. And the cast is also great. Like all the people behind it, like Judd Apatow is one of the writers and producers on it. But the cast, John C. Riley plays Dewey Cox, and he does great here. This is like, I feel like peak John C. Riley, like Talladega Nights, Step Brothers
Oh, dude.
era.
John C. Riley has such an insane range for an
He
actor, and
really
and he
does.
needs more credit, honestly, because
Yeah,
he's
you
such
know
a good
what?
actor.
This is a total diversion here, but I watched Boogie Nights for the first time like a year ago, and like he's good in that too, and entirely different type of thing. Like I always thought of him as a comedian, because I think my first exposure was in like Talladega Nights and then Step Brothers. But yeah, he really does have such
Mhm.
great range. And obviously super funny, and he definitely shows it off in this. But then we also have like Jenna Fisher plays the like Reese Witherspoon June Cash character. Um,
Mhm.
then like it's just so many comedic actors. I already mentioned Tim Meadows. And then you have so many people like making cameos too, as um who do they have playing the Beatles? They have like
I'm
Paul
pretty
Rudd and
sure.
Jack Black.
Yeah, and man, who all is it? I'm trying to get a cast list pulled up in front of me. Just oh yeah, Paul Rudd, Jack Black, Justin Long, and Jason Schwartzman.
Yes, yeah, that scene is hilarious, because they're
Mhm.
talking about like doing LSD and stuff. They speaking of Frankie Muniz, he plays Buddy Holly in this.
Yeah, he's there for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's what's great. I mean, you even have Craig Robinson, Kristen Wiig. I think Kristen Wiig plays his first wife, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of recognizable: Chris Parnell, Jack McBrayer. A lot of like even in more like faces that people will recognize better than um, even names. Oh,
Mhm.
another tie-in to The Quarry: Skylar Gisondo he was a very young child in this one. I think he played one of his kids or something. But he was apparently in this as well.
Huh. Neat.
But yeah, Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. It it is so funny, and it's one that I feel like I get more appreciation for every time I watch it, and every
Yeah,
time I
I
watch a new what'd you call? I never even heard that term before. Rockumentary that you used earlier. I like
oh
that.
yeah, rockumentary, biopic. There's words.
And then I think you had one more kind of in the same vein to take us home.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can't have a biopic list without talking about This Is Spinal Tap. This Is Spinal Tap kind of did what so the if Walk Hard is for biopics, then This Is Spinal Tap is for documentaries, because the way that these guys talk on this film is absolutely fucking hilarious. They just sound like your regular rock band that got big and now they're kind of full of themselves. And honestly, that's just the entire movie, and that's what makes it so good. Like, I know before we were recording, we were talking about the scene with the amplifier that goes up to 11, and then they're like, "Oh, well, it goes up to 11 because 11 is a higher number than 10, so it's louder. It's quite loud."
It's such a classic scene. Like I haven't even seen this movie, and I know that scene because of just like how iconic it is, and like I feel like that scene went viral before that was even a thing, before
Yeah.
like the internet, you know?
Oh, dude, one of my old professors used to say it all the time in every jazz band rehearsal. If we needed to go back to measure 11, it was always, "Let's go to 11." And of course, everyone cracks up because This Is Spinal Tap. And just before this, I was looking at some more clips on YouTube. I found an absolutely hilarious one where the one of them sitting at a piano playing this thing in D minor, and it sounds like real solemn, kind of grim. And he plays it beautifully, and he's just bullshitting the entire time. At one point, he's like, "Yeah, it's kind of like between a Mozart and a Bach piece. Call it like a mock piece at that." And then someone says, "Oh man, that's really beautiful. What's the name of the song?" He's like, "Oh, I'm calling this one 'Lick My Love Pole.'" And it just completely deadpan serious. And that's just what makes it so good, is that these guys can actually sell that.
Right. Well, in this, I'm pretty sure like one of the big like legacies of this is that I'm pretty sure like the actual music that was made for this movie, like they put out as Spinal Tap. Am I making that up? I feel like I heard that.
You know, I'm pretty sure that's accurate. Let me double check real quick and make sure, because honestly, I'm not entirely sure. This is my confession time. I've actually never seen the movie. I've just heard really, really good things about it, but it's
For
definitely,
shame.
I know, but it's still definitely worth mentioning though, because every time I hear about any like good rock documentaries, This Is Spinal Tap is the one that always comes up in conversation. And even people that
Yeah.
haven't seen the movie know what it is. And like you said, you even know about Let's Go to 11.
Right.
Everyone knows about this movie. So they had to have done something right. As
Well,
far as, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, as far as like the legacy goes, like, if you're also unfamiliar, if you're unfamiliar with the movie and you're listening to this, like, it came out in 1984, and so it's very much focused on kind of like that era of rock band, and I just think the idea of doing like that mockumentary style at that time, like it's very commonplace now. I think obviously because The Office as a mockumentary, scripted TV series really took off. And I mean they
Mhm.
literally made, cut and paste with Parks and Rec as well. Like that's such a familiar thing that we're used to now in the cultural zeitgeist. Like this was like very unique at the time.
Yeah, it definitely was. And obviously they did something correct, because it's gone down as one of the best documentaries of all time. It's in the Library of Congress, it's in the National Film Registry, and I mean that was back in 2002. So people have known that this was good for a while. And I mean it's also directed by Rob Reiner, so he usually does some pretty good work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I really think that we're fascinated as just I think probably like the American culture and probably, internationally as well, because people love music so much and we end up idolizing musicians that have so much clout and so much kind of mystique around their characters. Like I think Elvis certainly embodies that. And it's interesting then to see that kind of flipped on its head with like the comedic movies that we ended here with. It was a lot of fun. I I want to mention also a couple more because I honestly didn't realize I had seen as many as I had, but we ended up mentioning Straight Outta Compton. That is one that I remember enjoying. Some other more recent ones, Walk the Line we mentioned. Let's see. Or the other two that I really want to mention, oh, The Dirt, which was the Netflix original movie centered on Motley Crue. I thought that had a really fun approach to it where they had the characters breaking the fourth wall and like talking to the camera. Did you see that one, Richard?
What was it called?
The Dirt?
No, I haven't actually. Is it? But it sounds like it's good based on what you said.
Yeah, so I think it's based on a like basically a tell-all book um
Hmm.
from the band. And so that one was some pretty wild stuff. You get like cameos from other like era musicians. Ozzy Osbourne has a big like a little cameo moment in there as well.
Hmm.
And then another one that I saw not too long ago was Rocket Man, which was the Elton John
Hmm.
biopic, which again very much follows the same formula, but I think that I think Rocket Man in particular, like, does what Bohemian Rhapsody was trying to do better.
Hmm.
It I think there's a better energy to it. Like you get a lot of musical performances. Like that one is almost more of like a musical in like a traditional musical sense,
Yeah.
like where people just kind of will go into song. Whereas Bohemian Rhapsody is not a musical like that because the only time like the music is happening is when they are performing it on stage. So I think like
Right.
that's the big difference. And so I think I prefer Rocket Man. But I wanted to talk about Bohemian Rhapsody because it was so polarizing. But
Hmm.
it's definitely another one to check out if you are interested in seeing a lot of these. Because I mean, Elton John was another name that's like, I'm very familiar with this name, but like don't really know much about how, he got into the industry or like what his influences were, like his story in general. So I
Hmm.
remember really enjoying that one.
Yeah, I've heard some really, really good things about it, but it's also one that I haven't seen.
Yeah, definitely one I would recommend for sure. But
Mhm.
Richard, before we wrap things up, and any final thoughts?
Just to kind of piggyback off what you were saying about some good rock documentaries, there's some really good concert films I want to give honorable mention to real quick. If you are a marijuana enthusiast, you might find your evenings better if you put on Pink Floyd live at Pompeii. It's just them playing in an old Coliseum, and honestly, it's pretty good. Other than that, I would also say Stop Making Sense is really good. It's a Talking Heads concert, but it was actually directed by Jonathan Demme, and it's actually really, really well made if you're a fan of Talking Heads and like new wave music. Um, Other than that, I don't really have much to add.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a part of this conversation. You're the resident music expert, and to have your opinion on these was definitely something that I wanted to have for this segment. So I appreciate you jumping into this conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
So we're gonna take another short break, and then when we come back, unfortunately, it's just gonna be me. But I am gonna be talking about the state of Star Wars, specifically Star Wars television under the Disney banner, and what we've seen from the first few Disney projects. So stick around. All right, welcome back. So gonna totally shift gears here from talking about music biopics to talking about the story that we all know and have loved probably at at certain points in our lives to various extents, and that is Star Wars. And I think what's interesting about Star Wars is, I mean, without a doubt, the original movie, and I would say often it's extended to the original trilogy as a whole, were truly groundbreaking and inspired so much in the science fiction genre, in just like adventure storytelling, fantasy storytelling as well. So, I mean, Star Wars is so iconic, and this all goes without saying. I'm just kind of trying to frame the conversation here a little bit. And we saw, obviously, in the early 2010s, there was a lot of waves that were made when Lucasfilm was bought by the Walt Disney Company. And so we saw a shift in Star Wars at that point. Now, you could obviously make the argument that there was a significant shift in Star Wars when the prequel trilogy was made. And I would agree with you there. Like, there is obviously a difference in tone. George Lucas notoriously was fascinated by the technology of the time and really wanted to be on the cutting edge of that very young technology. So like the 3D CGI type of elements, Jar Jar Binks being an entirely CGI character, it was a product of George Lucas really wanting to push the envelope and really be at the forefront of these developments in filmmaking. And so, you know, it makes sense that someone might want to do that. But ultimately, what people loved about Star Wars was not inherently tied to the practical effects, but that was a big part of it, but big part of just the overall tone and style of those movies. And like George Lucas, he directed the first movie, but he did not have that same type of domineering role in the last two that he had in the prequels. And so there's definitely a change in tone for the prequels, but then we have Disney, who is a huge mega corporation, purchasing Lucasfilm, which is obviously the parent company that owns the rights to Star Wars, as well as Indiana Jones and these various George Lucas properties. And so there's a lot of questioning about what was going to happen with the franchise at that point in time. Ultimately, we find out the answer is we get the sequel trilogies. The sequel trilogy, I should say, as well as we started seeing the spin-off movies. So Rogue One was the first that we had. We also saw Solo as well. And so with the big push, the big move to streaming as a platform, Disney obviously jumped in on that, and we ended up with Disney Plus. And so kind of fast forwarding a little bit to where we're at now in this kind of modern era of Star Wars is we're now seeing these Star Wars properties end up on Disney Plus as series. And so, I mean, we've seen, it's kind of notorious at this point that Disney was really milking the nostalgia for the original movies, to the point where a lot of the criticism about The Force Awakens is that it was just kind of a remake of A New Hope. It was, point by point, the same kind of story, and was really echoing back to the original trilogy as well. And, some of that criticism is super valid. A lot of it is valid. And a lot of it also is just kind of, because in a timeline, the sequel series comes after the original trilogy, despite the fact that the prequel trilogy was made in between. So because of that, the way that those movies were made, it really kind of throws off the flow of a lot of things. And so I think in a lot of ways, just trying to continue the story also did seem like it was trying to nostalgia bait the audience. And I have my feelings about Star Wars at this point in time. I love The Force Awakens. I was very much super on board with just having Star Wars movies back in my life. And I remember watching that multiple times. I remember having that movie alone on Blu-ray or 4K. I don't think it was 4K at that time, but I think I had it in Blu-ray. Was super excited about it. And, we got The Last Jedi, and The Last Jedi was super, super polarizing for people because of the decisions that Rian Johnson made in it, where it didn't seem quite as reverent to the original trilogy and to the lore of Star Wars. And obviously people love Star Wars. They love the story of it. The whole expanded universe of the novels and the comics and everything. There was so much story that was outside of the movies that people who were big fans grew attached to and loved. And Disney came in and they're like, nope, none of that's canon. What's canon is these movies. And we're now going to establish our new canon. And so they decided all that stuff was going to be known as Star Wars Legends. So it still exists. Obviously, you can't fully get rid of it, though I think they would get rid of it if they could, so they could have full control over the stories and the lore of Star Wars. But it still exists. If you are wanting to get a taste of what that stuff was like, you can still find a lot of those books, comics, all of those types of things, even video games as well. But yeah, so Disney takes over and they're establishing their new canon. They're putting out The Force Awakens and their sequel trilogy. They're deciding they're going to do spin-off movies. I will just, as a quick aside, say that Rogue One is one of my favorite Star Wars movies. I think it's probably in my top 3 for sure. And I'm not even, I'm not ashamed of that by any means. I think Rogue One is a really great story. And I think what's so nice about it is, although it builds off of A New Hope, it takes just a tiny piece of A New Hope and really just makes something out of that tiny piece. Like literally, it was just like the opening where they say like a team of, in the opening crawl, where it says like a team of rebel spies was able to locate these plans. That's Star plans. And they make a movie out of it. A lot of fun. It's a war movie, first and foremost, and just a lot of fun. So I really like Rogue One. And I say that to kind of frame where I'm coming, the perspective that I'm coming at this with, because the problem with having such a huge company like Disney as the owners and proprietors of a beloved franchise like this is they're not going to be as likely to take risks. They're not necessarily going to be as beholden to what the fan base loves. They're going to be more, first and foremost, beholden to the bottom line, to their dollars. And that's just a case of capitalism. That's not to say that Disney is a villainous corporation or whatever. If you feel that way, you can feel that way. I don't necessarily feel that way. I think they're a company. I think companies have goals that they are inherently striving for, and making money is first and foremost the main goal for all of them, really. I mean, because if they don't make money, they're not going to exist. So that does need to be a significant goal for any type of corporation. But I think the byproduct of that is that we start to have kind of a saturated market of this. And with such a beloved property as Star Wars, that's not necessarily as good as you might think. Like there is a, less is more sort of sweet spot between, going years without any type of official property, on-screen property, versus, every month we have. And it's interesting to parallel both Star Wars with Marvel, because Marvel also is owned by Disney. And we have now seen Disney, in response to the public reception of the Marvel Studios movies, that they are now doing the same thing, where they're now making Disney Plus series. And even more so, Marvel has a movie pretty much every month. Before the pandemic, it was essentially, like every 2 or 3 months we were going to have a movie, and we're starting to get to that now. I'm talking in between Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, and Thor: Love and Thunder at the moment. And I also love Marvel. So I find myself torn in 2 different directions with these things, because obviously, these are properties that I love, that have given me a lot of memories. I have a lot of nostalgia in a lot of cases, more so for Star Wars than for Marvel, because Marvel has always been kind of an ever-present thing for me in my life. Star Wars has had like peaks and valleys. It's had moments where it's not existed. But this is all to say that the approach to creating Star Wars content has definitely changed. And in a lot of cases, I do really enjoy it. In some cases, I think that we need to chill out a little bit. For one, I'm definitely glad that we have not seen like a continuation of the movies, in particular the main story movies. Since the Last Skywalker, I wasn't a big fan of The Last Skywalker. I also wasn't a big fan of The Last Jedi. So as a whole, the sequel trilogy, not my favorite. I do have a little bit more of an appreciation for the prequel movies at this point in my life. Whether that's nostalgia, whether that's legitimate merit is up for debate. I honestly don't think about that too much myself. But I'm glad that they've not continued to just crank out movies, because I think that would exponentially cheapen the product. It would cheapen what Star Wars means to everyone. And I think Star Wars has one of the most rabid fan bases. If you see, Star Wars Celebration, just the tweets that have come out, like I was seeing all of these tweets about Star Wars Celebration. And then anytime there's a big series like this, like everyone knows the craziness about Baby Yoda when The Mandalorian first debuted. And obviously The Mandalorian was the first live action Star Wars series to come out under the Disney umbrella. And what's interesting is that Star Wars had been doing series for a while, and specifically they've been doing animated series. So we had the Clone Wars. We also had Star Wars Rebels also. And the idea of doing a scripted, live action series for Star Wars, it was something super interesting and intriguing at the time leading up to The Mandalorian. And I think when the series actually came out, a lot of people were, really on board with what was happening, or at least got on board by the end of the series. I think Mandalorian is very much like a serial, at least the first series I felt was very formulaic. It's very much a serialized story where it's like, oh, well, he's going like place to place. He's going to have an issue this week. There was an overarching storyline, but it was tied back to like, well, in this week, the Mando is going to take care of this problem, and so on. And we still did not see much of the Jedi of it all in that series. Since then, we've also had the Book of Boba Fett. And to be honest, I have not seen the Book of Boba Fett. I also have not watched the animated series, with the exception of a little bit of the Clone Wars. I did start the Clone Wars, and I have not made my way all the way through yet. But I would like to, because I do hear really great things about it. So again, this is all framing the conversation leading up to the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which at the time that I'm recording this actually just had its finale in this past week. And I want to kind of just take you through my journey with this movie, with this series. And it's funny I say that, because ultimately I kind of felt like this was a movie that was just stretched out to make it into a TV series and to be something that they can put out weekly on Disney Plus and get some subscribers, get a nice subscriber bump going here. And that, I think, is where the corporate side of Disney comes through, because I truly feel like if this was a movie, this could have been so good. This could have been, if this were made into a movie, if you edited down the roughly 5+ hours of footage of this series and made it into a movie, I would probably have this in my top 3, with Empire Strikes Back, with Rogue One, because I do think that there is enough good stuff in this series to make just an amazing film. Unfortunately, I do feel like it loses a lot by just its runtime, the sheer length of it, by being a TV series and not really capitalizing on being a TV series. So that's my biggest criticism, because I have similar feelings about The Mandalorian. The difference being that for me personally, I'm much more much more bought into the Jedi Sith kind of storyline, because I was raised on the prequels. Like, that was a big part of it. I saw Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan fighting Darth Maul, as a child in the theater watching The Phantom Menace. So that was like Star Wars to me. That's my Star Wars. And so to see Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was a character from the very original that we got fleshed out in the prequels, that was such a critical part of the saga as a whole, was a critical part of the Clone Wars series, makes an appearance in Rebels, like all of these things really building up this character. Ewan McGregor being just beloved as the actor portraying this character as well. There was a lot of pressure on this series, and in some ways I feel like they knocked it out of the park. In some ways I feel like, they really dropped the ball. And I would say that, when I was asked to kind of give my take about it, I would say that I wasn't really expecting this series to be great. I kind of had mixed feelings when I had heard it announced, because it is so sacred to me, basically, like, at least like the memories that I have of this character and of the mythos of the Jedi and everything is very valuable to me. The idea of it being stretched out into a series, and the potential of it being ruined, to be honest, was a little bit scary to me. And so I did not go into it with the expectation that it was going to be great. I kind of was tempering my expectations on purpose, and also just the track record of what we had seen so far. Like I mentioned, I wasn't a big fan of The Last Jedi. I wasn't a big fan of The Rise of Skywalker. Did I say The Last Skywalker earlier? I don't know if I did, but I feel like I did. And so I was not very optimistic about this show. And I will say, after the first couple episodes, I still was not very optimistic about it, because it starts out very, very slow. And I think it kind of holds your hand in a lot of ways, because I think for the most part, people understand that Obi-Wan was on Tatooine just kind of camping out and watching Luke. Like, I think that's what people understand about what was happening in this time period. But the way they kind of, show, his day-to-day, and his day-to-day is very boring. It did not really excite me the way I was hoping there was a chance it might, I guess, if I say that. The redeeming quality of the first few episodes, the one big redeeming element to me was Leia, because that character, the character of Leia Organa is, I put this out in a tweet, I think this is the best character in Star Wars. And I think that this show really solidified that for me, and really signaled that she has always been such a great character. And I say always, meaning like since she was a child in the actual Star Wars canon timeline, versus always like now in 2022 when this comes out, and in 1977 when A New Hope came out and Carrie Fisher was first playing this character. She is one of the best, if not the best, character in the entire Star Wars franchise. And I'm blanking on the young actress's name who plays her in this series, but she does a very, very great job really embodying the spirit of both Leia and specifically of Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia. And so I thought that was great. I loved that about the first few episodes. And they sprinkle in a couple of other interesting characters. I think Haja, who's Kumail Nanjiani's character, is interesting. I think you could have had more of him in this series, to be honest, but they didn't overdo it, which I was maybe a little bit more worried about when I first saw him. But they didn't overdo it, so I appreciated that. I think there's a lot of, where they kind of illustrated what was happening on Tatooine, where they kind of retold what was going on with Obi-Wan at that point in time. that I felt was unnecessary. I felt like they could have better used that time to flesh out the story of the Inquisitors, because I don't think that's as common knowledge as like, Obi-Wan camping out and being a hermit. Like, everyone's seen that first movie. Everyone knows that. We don't need to see him packing up fish or whatever. I would have liked to have seen more about the Inquisitors and got more knowledge about that I don't think is as commonplace. But they didn't. They kind of just dropped you in and they're like, oh, they're hunting Jedi. They're a Jedi that survived Order 66. And I played Jedi Fallen Order, so I understand that much. But I think they could have done it on screen and maybe painted a better picture of this specific group, the Grand Inquisitor and of the Third Sister. Because I think it's another thing. There's a very slow burn with the Third Sister. I think ultimately it ends up paying off with a character and the writing and the story that's really slow to pick up, eventually does catch on and is pretty powerful by the end of it. But for the most part, it's not there in the beginning. And I think that it's the show really picks up its pace a little bit and kind of hints at things and sets things up kind of quietly, is the best way I could put it. To the point where then in the season finale we're almost like getting payoffs on everything. And when I say payoffs, not just what the series sets up, but also what has been set up in the lore and in the timeline of these stories and events. Obviously we know what the falling out between Anakin and Obi-Wan. We know what happened with the twins, and we know what happened with Padme and not being able to, she didn't survive giving birth to them. And they were, not being able to know their father, their parents. They were given to the safety of the Organas and of the Lars, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. And there's just so much that really does kind of pay off in the finale. And so I guess if you have not seen Obi-Wan Kenobi and you are considering it, that is what I would want you to know. I think it starts off very slow and you're going to have to kind of chug through it. If that makes sense. You're going to have to kind of stay strong, get through the first couple episodes, and then by the time you get to the end, it's really going to be satisfying, because some of the moments between Vader and Obi-Wan are fantastic. The references, the callbacks, Hayden Christensen being involved in the project, it ends up being great. I was one of the ones that would hear that and be like, well, it's Darth Vader. Like, what does it matter that Hayden Christensen's going to be involved? Like, you're not going to see his face. And I think his involvement was really welcome. I'm really glad that he was bought into it and wanted to be a part of this, because I think it worked out overall. And I do think that this really does have a lot of great moments and adds to the characters that we know and love. I mean, there's people that are going crazy over Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru being kind of, secret badasses. And really, there's a lot of ways that I think I've seen this, and I want to echo this statement. There's a lot of ways that this series enhances A New Hope. And I think as a means of enhancing A New Hope, that's what part of what I loved so much about Rogue One is it really makes A New Hope that much more epic, that much more. And this is another project that really adds to it. And in some ways, Solo does add a little bit more, but specifically to Han's character. But that takes place a little bit further out. I'm not sure exactly where things fall in the timeline, but that isn't as directly impacting the story of A New Hope. So that's all to say that ultimately I did really enjoy this series, but I don't enjoy that it is a series, if that makes sense. I would have much rather this have been a movie, and I would have even settled for like a really short limited series. Like, this probably met some sort of criteria to be eligible for award consideration, like they've done with a lot of Marvel series as well. And that is where the ugly face of corporate America chimes in, because awards equals bragging rights equals dollars, and also stretching things out to lengths that are unnecessary can also equal dollars, but can weaken the product and That's my biggest criticism of what Disney has done with Star Wars and to a certain extent with Marvel. But I will say, I'm much more of a Marvel fan than I am a Star Wars fan, and so I the other thing with Marvel is that, well, I won't even say this because I think Marvel at this point is reaching the amount of lore and story that Star Wars kind of has. In that people are starting to be turned off from Marvel movies because they feel like they need to see all these other things and they don't want to do it. And I actually don't think that's the case, because I think Marvel movies, for the most part, can be something that you just go into and you can enjoy for what it's worth. If you are curious about certain characters, you can Google it about what happened or whatever. I don't think anyone needs to watch anything going into a Marvel movie. You can enjoy it for what it is. And I think in the same token, I think that's what Star Wars is at this point as well. So overall, I mean, that was kind of my take on Obi-Wan Kenobi. I obviously did not get into spoilers. So, if you have not seen it yet and you're considering it, again, I would recommend it. Just know that it does start off a little slow and it's not the tightest overall. And I'm curious to see what ends up happening with Star Wars at this point. I mean, I know years ago, probably before the pandemic and everything, we started getting the hint of there being additional, a side trilogy, like a spin-off trilogy coming. And that's not something I necessarily want to see. I know that they've been cranking out novels, and reading those stories is not something I've really ever gotten into, is reading those side story novels. But I know that it informs a lot of the new canon. So, maybe at some point that's something I check out. One thing I have enjoyed is, I mentioned Jedi Fallen Order. I really liked playing that game. I'm excited about the sequel. I think the video games is something that it's nice that Star Wars makes that canon, makes that part of the canon, versus like Marvel hasn't done that, right? Marvel's video games have been totally separate from what they've put on screen, whether that's series or movies. And I think that's one thing that's unique about Disney's approach now with Star Wars, is that they're making these canonical video games as well. Overall, like I'm saying, I enjoyed this. I think you'll enjoy it if you are a fan of Star Wars. And it's just kind of the nature of the beast at this point. It's hard to be super excited about these franchises when we know that they're kind of always going to be risk averse, and they're going to make the decisions based on money, and they're going to try and do the most people pleasing things every time. And even when they don't, I almost feel like Star Wars got scared off because of The Last Jedi, and because Rian Johnson took some big swings and they didn't really pay off. But I think you have to just really be strategic with what you're doing and still take those risks and take those swings. But the issue is, when that happens, if something doesn't make money, then they're going to stay away from it again. And then, they totally course correct and give us the Rise of Skywalker, which just really is a bunch of, just crap that they put together to try and appeal to people that were fans. And it didn't end up working out that way either. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm hoping that we continue to get some quality material, and I'm hoping that there's some consideration to the modes that we're taking in this material as well going forward. But that's going to go ahead and wrap up our episode today. This was more of a unique one for us. It was a little bit more self-contained on the podcast today, with myself and Richard. Always trying to bring on some guests, and we've had a lot of really great guests on this second season of the podcast. It's something I want to continue with going forward. Had some plans that didn't work out. It happens. And honestly, given how borderline disastrous the last episode's production process was, it was nice to really just make this a self-contained thing. And Richard and I being able to run this episode ourselves was pretty nice. So thank you so much for bearing with us here. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please, hit us with a comment, some of your favorite music biopics, let us know what some of your favorite Star Wars projects are. If you have strong takes on Star Wars, drop it in the comments as well. Any couple of seconds that you take to like, subscribe, follow, all of that stuff is going to mean a lot to me. So I definitely appreciate the consideration there. A couple of housekeeping things, some things to look out for. This episode is dropping on Thursday. Tomorrow, Friday, July 1st, is actually going to be, we're going to be releasing the Pokemon Heart Gold Flying Types Only challenge on our YouTube channel. So that is going to be a YouTube exclusive video. So if you have not seen our Pokemon Leaf Green Water Types Only video, definitely check that out. And then you can double it up with the Flying Types Only video right afterwards. And be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel to make sure you don't miss any of those. We're going to try and get one of those out every month. And, I don't want to get anyone, tease something too far out, but when we're adjusting for season 3, hoping that we might be able to get YouTube a little bit more involved and maybe do some more of that YouTube exclusive content, some video exclusive content moving forward. But that is going to wrap up this episode. I just wanted to say thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.